Hi everyone, this is the second session. We should start. And Wolff and Goldman in the back.
That's what happened when he knows the names.
Yeah, I know the voices. I can't see you from here, but I know your voice.
He knows voices.
Yeah. Okay. So this panel is titled Academic Freedom in Theory and Practice, which means it's going to be exciting and depressing. I won't take too much of your time. I'm Amira Baum. I'm a senior lecturer here at the law school. And because we already lost some time, apologies for technicalities. We'll go straight to presentations, and whatever time is left for the Q&A will be in the end. So the first one to present is Sharona Aharoni Goldenberg, right, from Netanya Academic College, and you'll tell us what you're talking about, a bit about yourself. You have 17 minutes of academic freedom, and then I stop.
17 minutes of academic freedom. Hi, shalom everyone. My name is Sharona Goldenberg. I'm writing about academic freedom inter alia. This paper was written by myself and Professor Jerry Sussman, and we refer in the paper to the following scenario. We have an Israeli scholar who wants to teach math, and we have scholar B who wants to boycott scholar A. He says, I have the right to boycott you and fire you because you're Israeli. That's the basic scenario we are gathered here to talk about. And the research question is how to deal with opposing claims to academic freedom. Okay, scholar A says I have academic freedom, scholar B says I have academic freedom, and how do we do with such opposing rights? And there are three types of academic freedom violations. First, we can refer to a case where scholar A's academic freedom is breached by an external entity. For example, the church doesn't allow Galileo Galilei to publish his work. Type 2 scenario refers to an internal interference. Scholar A says to scholar B says to scholar A, you can't teach because you are, I don't know what, black. Okay. And then we have a type 3 scenario. We have an external entity who manipulates scholar B to breach the academic freedom of scholar A. In such cases, we would like to, first of all, ask what type of scenario is the BDS campaign against Israeli academia, and how to balance clashing scholars' rights. And here's the agenda. I'll start by referring to academic freedom. When we have a scenario of opposing academic freedom claims, we first must examine, is the activity of scholar B covered by academic freedom? So we have to examine what's academic freedom. And the normative sources of academic freedom are various, and for example, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the European Convention of Human Rights, etc., etc. And if we write and process all these sources, we come out with two pillars of academic freedom. In other words, academic freedom is composed of the following two pillars: academic inclusion and academic expression. Academic inclusion refers to the right to participate in the cultural life of the community, to research, to teach, to write, to be a member of professional academic bodies, and to receive international cooperation. Academic inclusion is based on three values: equality, capacity, and a co-educational academic environment. Equality means that one cannot be hired or fired due to his or her nationality. And one cannot be fired because he's Jewish or because he's black. Firing and hiring should be subject to capacity, meritocracy. And the right to enjoy a pro-educational academic environment. The right to teach in an atmosphere promoting speculation and experiment. In other words, academics cannot thrive in a hostile learning environment, as said by Judge Powell. The second pillar of academic freedom refers to academic expression. And here we can differentiate, according to Byron, between two norms. First, a general freedom of speech that everyone enjoys outside academia. And second, a specific right to academic freedom within academia. Okay? And I'm referring to the academic expression within academia. And this is composed of the academic expression in teaching and research, freedom of opinion, freedom of political participation, and the freedom to receive academic materials. I'm afraid of it though, so I won't get into it. You are invited to read the paper about the specificities of academic expression. And academic freedom of expression has its limits. For example, it is intramural within academia. It is subject to scrutiny, to professional standards, to research ethics. It does not cover political utterances or incivilities. And it is subject to the respect of fellow scholars. And it is limited by considerations of equality. After we understand what's the right of scholar B, what can he or she can do or cannot do, we've got to examine whether the academic freedom of scholar A is compromised by the utterances or by the boycott of scholar B. So how can academic freedom be compromised by the activities of fellow scholars? For example, if one restricts the subject of the research, you cannot write about academic freedom of Israelis. Okay, that's an example. By racist academic admission criteria, by disturbances on seminars and lectures, by boycotts, by racist utterances and incivilities. So scholar B can breach the right of scholar A by the above ways. And this can also happen when we refer to an external entity manipulating scholar B to breach the right of academic freedom of scholar A. So we have two scholars, I have the right, both claim to have the right to academic freedom. How do we balance those opposing rights? Jerry and I propose the following 3 tests to weigh opposing academic rights. First, the relevance test. Can we say that the boycott or the utterances of scholar B promote research? Are they methodological? Are they based on facts? For example, scholar A teaches math and scholar B does not speak to scholar A because she's a woman. This is irrelevant to academia, and therefore scholars A right to academic freedom prevails. The second test in balancing clashing rights is the seclusion against exclusion test. rights can be exercised in two ways. As exclusive exercise of a right. For example, such an exercise of a right does not breach the right of others. I'm not breaching your right to academic freedom. And there's an exclusionary exercise of a right. If this young student starts screaming, and she's not, but if she starts screaming when I'm talking, she's exercising her freedom of speech, but she does it in an exclusionary way that breaches my right to speech. We are okay. Okay. If there's an exclusionary exercise of freedom of speech, of academic freedom of speech, the liberty, it cannot prevail. The seclusionary exercise of a right will always prevail over the exclusionary exercise of a right. And finally, the virtue test. We believe that we have to examine the agenda behind the activity in question. We believe that activities representing democratic and humanistic values should always outweigh racist and totalitarian agendas. For example, Scholar A teaches math. Scholar B says women like Scholar A should stay at home and cook. In such a case, the professional agenda of Scholar A should prevail over the chauvinistic agenda of Scholar B. Let's apply all the tests we've suggested with regard to the academic boycott of Israel. Let's start with the background of the BDS campaign, Boycott, Divest and Sanction. Its goal is to end Israeli occupation of all Arab lands, including Tel Aviv. It calls for the return of millions of Palestinian refugees and their descendants to Israel. Its leaders are Barghouti and another one, some of which have ties to terrorism. Okay? And PACB is kind of is connected to the BDS campaign, and it urges academics to boycott Israeli institutions, not to review Israeli dissertations, not to write letters of recommendation to Israeli faculty, etc. So does the campaign and the people implementing, the scholars implementing the campaign, do they breach academic freedom? The campaign, the BDS campaign, is a type 3 scenario. There's an external political entity, the BDS, which manipulates or is connected to campaigning scholars, Scholar B, which influence or breach the right of academic freedom of Israeli scholars. So, is the academic freedom of Scholar A, the Israelis, compromised? Yes. If they are denied fellowship because they're Israeli, the academic freedom is breached. If they are refused to receive academic materials, for example, an anti-serum, a chemical material, because they're Israeli, the academic freedom is breached. If they are dismissed because they are Israeli, their academic freedom is breached. How many?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. So, such an activity, de facto and de jure, exclude Israeli scholars from academia. And there's a group too of interference with academic freedom of Israeli scholars, when protesters shut down their lectures, etc. So the academic freedom or academic expression of Israeli scholars is infringed by the campaign. campaign's manifestations are not covered by academic freedom. They are not about professional matters. They do not follow professional standards. They are political utterances. They do not respect the rights of fellow scholars, and they are not subject to considerations of equality. And therefore, in balancing the rights of Israeli scholars and the academic freedom of the campaigners, we believe that the right of the academic freedom of Israeli scholars prevails over the dubious academic freedom to boycott Israeli scholars. Thank you.
You were great at respecting the time limits. Okay, so we'll continue immediately with the next speakers that are Kathy Galor and Noga Wolff. Kathy Galor from Brown University and Noga Wolff is here from the college.
Okay, so let me begin by thanking the organizers for creating space for this important and really increasingly urgent conversation. The fact that we are able to ask these questions and engage them critically, especially in the current moment, is in itself a point that gives reason for hope. Now, our point of departure is very simple. We argue that the boundaries of academic freedom are being redrawn in relation to war, especially as scholars critically engage with Israeli state policies and practices, and also with the lived realities and claims of Palestinians. Since October 2023, this work has become increasingly risky across academic settings, and what we are witnessing is not only political polarization, but systematic patterns of constraint. And these constraints or these patterns shape teaching, research, public events, and publishing. Now, in our study, we explore these developments as a transnational phenomenon, and our focus is on the United States, Germany, and Israel. That reflects the fact that these contexts are politically, institutionally, and materially entangled in the current war, including through forms of state support that, of course, extend beyond rhetoric. And in all three cases, universities are not external observers. They are deeply immersed in state structures, funding regimes, and also wartime priorities. So to analyze these developments, we understand academic repression not as isolated acts of censorship, but as a form of institutional governance under conditions of war and conflict. Drawing on Michel Foucault, we treat universities as sites where power operates through knowledge itself, including through curricula, hiring, funding, and disciplinary procedures. These are the mechanisms through which boundaries of legitimate inquiry, acceptable critique, and responsible professional conduct are produced. Crucially, repression does not begin with punishment. It begins earlier as the boundaries of what can safely be said, taught, or researched start to narrow, producing self-censorship and withdrawal as ordinary features of academic life. And I should probably just briefly mention that the paper that is at the basis of this presentation is currently under review in an academic journal, and that we've also published several op-eds on the issue in Europe and the UK. So to begin with the United States, so in the United States, constraints on academic freedom has escalated sharply after October 2023, and what has come under pressure has been academic expression itself, what scholars teach, research, and publish about Israel and the war. Universities have not been only pressured rhetorically, but from the outside. State powers have intervened directly in university leadership. University presidents were summoned before Congress, as you probably all know, publicly interrogated and pushed to resign, making clear that institutional autonomy itself was under political control. Within academic institutions, this intervention has had concrete consequences. Lectures, workshops, conferences, courses, programs, and positions have been canceled. A tenured professor was dismissed for speech related to the war. The fact that this professor was Jewish matters analytically because it shows that repression is not about protecting Jewish scholars, but about enforcing political alignment. The chilling effect extends further through arrests, imprisonment, and deportations affecting students and scholars, making the cost of academic speech feel existential rather than merely professional. In Germany, constraints on academic freedom are structured through memory politics and state doctrine centered on Staatsräson, which frames support for Israel as moral obligation grounded in Holocaust responsibility. Critical scholarship on Israel and the war is therefore often treated not simply as disagreement, but as a challenge to institutional legitimacy. What matters here is governance through administration and employment. In German academia, where many professors at public universities are public employees, hiring, contracts, and affiliations are tied to loyalty expectations that are increasingly interpreted to include alignment with the state position on Israel. This logic is reinforced through university funding structures and administrative oversight. Non-binding parliamentary resolutions and administrative guidelines function as compliance tools shaping decisions about who may teach, research, publish, or be invited. Lectures, courses, workshops, conferences, and visiting positions have been canceled or withdrawn, including a prominent case in which a visiting professorship was rescinded after public criticism of the war. The result in Germany, too, is a regime of preemptive compliance rather than overt bans. Administrative risk management narrows academic life, encouraging self-censorship, non-renewal of contracts, and also quite exclusion. In Israel, constraints on academic freedom since October 2023 are closely tied to security discourse and wartime governance. Repression operates through ordinary academic procedures as well as through exceptional security measures. Within universities here too, faculty contracts are not renewed, lectures dismissed, courses and events canceled, and disciplinary procedures initiated, often with limited transparency. At the same time, arrests and imprisonment linked to speech make clear that dissent can be treated as a security matter rather than as protected academic expression. A defining feature of this context is uneven exposure. Palestinian students and scholars face disproportionate surveillance and disciplinary action, and the consequences they encounter are often more severe and life-altering than those faced by their Jewish colleagues. This unevenness is also visible in the room we are in today. The fact that this conference can take place matters. but participation is not equally safe. The limited presence of Palestinian scholars reflects longer processes of exclusion and self-exclusion that shape academic life well before formal sanctions occur. Now, when we look across the United States, Germany, and Israel together, what becomes visible is a shared institutional logic that draws universities into the political management of war, even as the specific mechanisms differ. In Foucauldian terms, this reflects a reconfiguration of the university itself in which power and knowledge become aligned with state and military priorities, transforming academic freedom from a protected principle into a conditional practice and reshaping what can be taught, researched, and publicly articulated. And I will.
Okay, so I come with the print. I read from the paper. Where is the, okay. So, thank you, Kati. In this section of the presentation, we will use a critical perspective to describe how the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, a well-established organization, has contributed to the chilling patterns of repression that Kati described. As early as 2016, the IRA adopted a working definition of antisemitism to provide a standard for identifying anti-Semitic attitudes and actions. We argue that despite the organization's profound international reach and influence, a discourse about its essence and its consequences remain primarily within the academic circle and is less familiar to the broader public. From here, or is it touchable, or? קדימה פה? למטה? זה קדימה? The human rights language used in IRA's online and published content does not make the extent of its oppressive influence apparent to those unfamiliar with the organization. IRA uses emancipatory human rights and moral responsibility language to advance repressive goals. Educational authorities and right-wing watchdog organizations apply this strategy under the guise of protecting students' emotional well-being and preventing hate on campus. In practice, however, this rhetoric served as a tool to justify systematic restrictions on open debate, particularly by targeting students, faculty, especially Palestinians who criticize Israel. Consequently, the IRA definition of anti-Semitism has been widely criticized by numerous Jewish and progressive scholars who have offered alternative working definitions. Among them, Kenneth Stern, an anti-Semitism expert at the American Jewish Committee, and one of the original drafters of the IRA working definition, has warned that the nationalist governments and Jewish nationalist groups could misuse the definition to suppress legitimate criticism of Israel. The main problem with the IRA definition of anti-Semitism is its specific emphasis on Israel, which may lead to the conflation of anti-Semitism with criticism of the country. Amicus brief submitted by the Jewish Voice for Peace to the U.S. District Court in the District of Massachusetts argues that conflating Judaism with Zionism effectively imposes a particular religious and political identity on all Jews, disregarding the community's diversity of beliefs. I quote from the brief. This is not only deeply troubling, it is unlawful. Not only does the federal government lack the power to compel a particular definition of what it means to be Jewish, but federally funded institutions like Harvard may run afoul of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 if they impose implicitly or otherwise such a definition on their students, staff, and faculty, close quotation. Accordingly, in discussing Germany, the philosopher Susan Haim observed that current biased policy ignores the tradition of Jewish universalism, long articulated, for example, by German Jewish luminaries from Moses Mendelssohn to Hannah Arendt. According to Neyman, the most astonishing feature of this philo-Semitic theory is that in the name of atoning for the crime of their parents and grandparents, non-Jewish German publicly accused Jewish writers, artists, and activists who criticize Israel of anti-Semitism or not being Jewish at all. Following the case of Nancy Fraser, mentioned by Kathy, I will examine two recent cases which exemplify the paradox that of the philosopher Omri Boehm and the fascism scholar Jason Stanley. Both are descendants of Holocaust survivors. These cases represent only a small part of a much broader trend. Boehm's speech for the Buchenwald Liberation Memorial was cancelled in April after he was accused for instrumentalizing the Holocaust when referring to the Nakba in his writing. However, according to the German newspaper, the Tageszeitung, these accusations were simplistic and overlooked the real issue, that is, Boehm actually advocacy of Enlightenment humanism and applying international law in accordance with universal human rights without exception, as evidenced in his works. Similarly, in November 2025, Stanley Jason was forced to cut short his speech commemorating Kristallnacht in Frankfurt after he argued that Israel's policies towards the Palestinians contradict the humanistic legacy of Enlightenment, as articulated by Jewish thinkers such as Moses Mendelssohn. Emphasizing the harm experienced by Jewish individuals as a result of the IRA definition is not intended to diminish the persecution faced by non-Jews, Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, who are among its principal victims because of punitive regulation. Rather, we aim to highlight what we see as the definition's potential absurdity. Nevertheless, states do not act alone. In Germany, the US, and Israel, the conservative organizations actively target dissenting voices, and the impact is inevitable. German rectors embraced the IRA definition as early as 2019, and 30 US universities adopted it already by 2021 in USA. Yeah? 19 in Germany and 2021 in USA. In Israel, according to one of these organizations, Cameron Campus, 24 colleges have joined the IRA, joined the other universities and adopted the IRA definition. This reality heightens the academia's obligation not to follow, but to lead. It should insist on rational, evidence-based discourse that resists methods and worldviews that have wrought disaster upon both the world and the Jewish people in the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Right on time. As you can see, we're moving from theory to practice. Okay? So the next speakers are Stephen Sussman and Amira Halperin. Stephen is from Barry University, and you will introduce Amira from
correct.
Yeah, okay.
We are mixing between Hebrew and English when we are discussing.
Yeah. Okay.
need this for me?
For you, I know you so well, I don't need it, but I'll need it. Okay, I think we need to get started. I'll introduce Amira. So Dr. Amira Halperin is a media and communications scholar, public speaker, and former broadcast investigative journalist. Her pioneering research on the Palestinian community in the UK and on Syrian refugees in Canada positions her as a world expert in Middle Eastern refugees, media technologies, and Palestinian affairs. Amira is the author of the book, The Use of New Media by the Palestinian Diaspora in the United Kingdom. She is included among the few Israeli scholars to research the UK Palestinian diaspora. Quote, Amira Halperin embarks on a challenging ethnographic journey of deep digging and persistent exploration of a highly complex topic involving a highly volatile population, and she sets off to explore the use of new media technologies by members of the Palestinian diaspora in the United Kingdom, unquote, by Professor Sahar Kamis, in the book's preface. Currently, she serves as a senior research associate at the British Israel Communications and Research Centre, BICOM, in London. At BICOM, she collaborates with media outlets, members of the Parliament, lords, government ministers, and civil society in the UK and in Israel to provide research-based insights into Israeli and Palestinian societies and the broader implications of media and Middle East politics and UK foreign policy. She is a member of the ISGAP Oxford community, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, and a media expert of Forum Devora, Women in Foreign Policy and National Security. She is also a fellow with the London Centre for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism. Dr. Halperin is the manager of the scientific community of Science Abroad in London. Wow, that's great. I've known her for so long, I just figured this out.
Okay, so now we go to Steve, right?
Yeah.
So I will read Steve's now. Okay, so actually I had the honor to visit Steve at Barry University in Miami just now. And so he's there. He's a professor of public administration at Barry University in Miami, Florida. Also serves as the chair of the Academic Engagement Network in the US and a member of ISGAP Oxford Community. And also chairs the Resilience Group of ISGAP and the co-founder and president of the Palm Beach Center for Democracy and Policy Research. A non-partisan think tank focused on democracy, human rights, and foreign affairs. And in 2016 and 2024, Professor Sussman was a scholar on residence at the ISGAP Oxford Summer Institute for curriculum development in critical contemporary anti-Semitism studies. In 2022, he was a visiting scholar here in Israel at Tzfat Academic College, where he taught a course on US public policy making. His research focuses on public policy, anti-Semitism, and demographic resilience, examining how anti-Semitism is addressed in the United States. And what else? And more and more. And also a member at the same
The London Centre.
the London Center for Antisemitism.
And that London Centre is doing a conference in March in Haifa, University of Haifa.
In Haifa,
Where we'll be
yes.
presenting
We will be
something.
presenting them and then in New York.
Yeah.
Haifa.
Okay, so that took away, what, 30 seconds of our time? The title of our paper, When Academic Freedom Becomes Weaponized, the Normalization of Antisemitic Expression in Academia. I'm handling the US side, Amira will handle the UK side. Okay, so the presentation examines how academic freedom is applied in practice within universities, particularly following October 7th. It offers an institutional analysis grounded in public law, governance theory, and lived experience. I'm the public law side partially. Amira is largely the lived experience. We focus on the US and the UK because although they're different, we've had similar experiences when it comes to anti-Semitism on campuses. Did I go to I'm skipping slides.
Slide 4, I have something to add, so you can talk briefly about slide 4 and then I will add
Okay.
about slide.
Oops, here we go. So so just step in. We work very well together. She'll step in when she wants to. I'll step in when I want to. We've done a lot of this together. So our central argument is straightforward but troubling, that academic freedom is not being applied evenly. Expressions that would clearly be identified as discriminatory or hostile. Why is this jumping? It's jumping slides. I know why. It's going automatically. That's not good. Okay. Let me go to the next one. So as I said, our central argument is straightforward. Academic freedom is not being applied evenly. Expressions that would clearly be identified as discriminatory or hostile when directed at other protected groups are frequently reclassified as legitimate political critique when directed at Jews or Israel. And so does it keep jumping? No. So October 7th was not merely, it was the massacre that it was, but beyond that, it was a stress test for academic institutions. In its aftermath, we saw a dramatic escalation and anti-Semitic rhetoric on campuses across the US and UK. Much of this rhetoric was justified as political expression. Universities responded with general statements.
I think that when you go to slide 4, here I have to add something.
Yeah, so go ahead. This thing is jumping by itself. So
Do you know why it's jumping?
No, we can switch out of the presentation mode and then it won't go.
Oh, there you go. Let's go back to the So is there a way to keep it from moving? Oh, yeah, here we go.
You can.
Oh, here's the test. So we're on 4.
Yeah, do you want to talk about this and then I will add?
Okay, so what I was saying before, I think I mentioned this, that October 7th was a stress test for academic institutions. We saw a dramatic escalation in anti-Semitic rhetoric on campuses in the UK, and again, that jumped.
Okay,
So go ahead.
One of the most important things to remember in the context of anti-Semitism and terrorism is the fact that one of the reasons of the strong presence of radical activists on campuses, both in the US and in the UK, is the fact that most of the terrorist groups, the global terrorist groups like Hamas, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, they are working globally and penetrate into multiple sectors, which are government, industry, and academia at the same time. And there are strong links between all the sectors in the context of terrorism. So, for example, there is a legal bid now to remove Hamas from the list of the terrorist organization in the UK. And Fahad Ansari, who is been nominated to lead this legal bid to remove Hamas by Musa Abu Marzouk, is now actually recruiting, in a way, students on board. And there are many universities, non-officially and officially, that support this. So we are not operating in a vacuum of campuses merely, but it's very much related to the outside community as well, how these terrorists are operating. And just to give you an example, like Steve said, we're going to talk about our experiences. I will talk my own case, but just because I'm working so many years on these topics, I will give you one example, recent example. In July, in the summer, the government in the UK said that the UK university students risk going to jail if they express support for the proscribed group Palestine Action, which has been proscribed under the terrorist laws, and it's a group that is constantly, every weekend almost, they have demonstrations, and there is a big group of students that's supporting them. And the government is saying that this group deliberately, the strategy is deliberately involve drawing students into criminal activity under the guise of legitimate protest. And we have more than 1,500 individuals that signed, scholars, practitioners that signed in the protest of the prescription of Palestine Action. So this is one thing.
Thank you. Regarding this slide as well, I wanted to mention that there was this, after October 7th, I saw on US campuses this posture of political neutrality. I know we're being recorded, so I don't want to talk specifically about any one campus, specifically my campus, but what I found was that leadership within the universities would put out statements that were very neutral, not supporting or not supporting Israel or Hamas. It was just very neutral statements, and so that was, to me, that was a problem. So it left Jewish students and faculty exposed while signaling sort of a tolerance, and I saw that on campuses throughout the United States. So the next. So at its best, academic freedom protects the pursuit of truth, including controversial or unpopular ideas. It enables dissent, challenges orthodoxy, and sustains intellectual pluralism. In both the UK and the US traditions, academic freedom is tied not only to individual rights, but to the public good. We emphasize this because critiques of weaponization are often mischaracterized as attacks on academic freedom, and they're not. So, by itself. At its best, slide 6, this thing is nuts. So this slide captures the core governance. We're still on slide 7. We're on slide 7 now. So this slide captures the core governance failures. Universities regularly intervene when speech targets other minority groups, yet when Jews are targeted, administrators often defer, citing academic freedom. This differential treatment reflects ideological sensitivity. We're going back. Rather than what I would call principled consistency. And I know we have ACLU previous president here. I would argue that free speech is not absolute.
Nobody has ever contended that it is. That's a red herring.
Okay.
A straw person, choose your metaphor.
Okay. A key mechanism, so reframing anti-Semitism as political critique, a key mechanism enabling this normalization is the reframing of anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism. And some of you may be like me, I see all over social media and other places people trying to differentiate between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, which is yet a whole nother story. Criticism of Israeli policy is certainly legitimate, just like criticism of UK policy is legitimate. But contemporary campus discourse frequently goes further, denying Jewish self-determination, in my opinion, invoking Holocaust inversion and portraying Jewish identity as inherently oppressive, where we have to sometimes deny that we support Israel. You want to come into this group? Deny Israel. The institutional silence is not passive. When universities refuse to name anti-Semitism explicitly, they signal that Jewish concerns are politically inconvenient. This silence has structural consequences. It shapes enforcement decisions, complaint processes, and campus culture. The legal context in the United States, so Title VI, the Civil Rights Act, which was mentioned in the previous talk, requires federally funded universities to address discrimination in hostile environments based on race, color, or national origin. And the Department of Education has affirmed that this framework applies to anti-Semitism tied to Jewish ancestry. You want to talk about the UK?
Yeah.
You have about 5 minutes.
Okay, so.
After October 7, I mean, maybe only 5 minutes because we are really.
You're actually 15 minutes into your presentation.
Wow, because we have a lot to say.
Yeah.
So
Yes, but we need to leave time for Moran
yeah,
as
of
well.
course,
So.
of course.
Okay.
So we'll do it quickly. So I will summarize everything that I wanted to say.
And then I wanted to speak about.
Yeah, so I will do it very quickly. After October 7th, I worked as a university professor at Coventry University, and I also in the UK, and I also did my PhD and master's in the UK. So many years ago, so I would like just to give you a brief about what I experienced as a university professor that also lost her job there to a professor that is supporting pro-Palestine. So immediately after October 7th, most of the universities in the UK, including University of Oxford, this is very important for me to say because we see that also in the Ivy League universities there are problems of support and glorification of terrorism. Most of the managements of universities promised that they would support all members of staff, whether they are Palestinians, Israelis, regardless to their faiths and beliefs and so on, and it never happened. One of the reasons for the failure of the counterterrorism strategies is the fact that there is a strong movement of Palestinians arguing that these counter-terrorism strategies are disturbing and violating their rights because they say that the management of universities are using CCTV cameras only in the prayer rooms and so on. So there is a big protest against this. And of course, there is much more to say, but I think that also when we talked about one of the speakers here pointed at you, this happened to me in reality, where a student pointed at me while I was standing on the podium a few days after my relatives and friends were killed and massacred in Israel, and then as a British-Israeli professor standing and being threatened by a 21-year-old British young student. That was a horrific experience, but also implies that the mainstream media, this is a pivotal role of the mainstream media that told him that Israel actually exploded the hospital, Aharoni hospital at the time, and he believed this, and therefore he said that his professor is to be blamed, and so on and so forth. And Steve has to just
Let me just bring up.
and then we will wrap up in 1 minute.
So I
with
just want to
conclusions.
bring up, in the United States in 1969, there was a case called Brandenburg versus Ohio, Supreme Court case that established that speech may only be restricted when it is intended to incite imminent lawless action and is likely to produce such action. Brandenburg was decided in a radically different period. Speech circulated slowly, remained local, and had limited reach. The Supreme Court's focus on imminence assumed physical proximity, temporal immediacy. That historical context matters when institutions attempt to apply Brandenburg now. So administrators frequently treat Brandenburg as it's frozen in constitutional analysis in 1969. That reading is no longer defensible. First Amendment doctrine has always been context sensitive. In a digital environment, speech that legitimizes or glorifies violence can produce foreseeable harm without explicit calls to action. Universities that treat Brandenburg as an absolute shield are not following constitutional law, they are avoiding constitutional responsibility. So protests, classroom statements, symbolic rhetoric are live streamed, reposted, reframed instantly. Jewish students, faculty, and Jewish spaces become identifiable targets. Universities cannot plausibly claim lack of imminence or lack of harm in this environment. So what this legal and institutional analysis shows is not merely a theoretical failure, but a human one. To understand how these dynamics operate in practice, I will turn it back to Amira.
So I know we don't have time much to conclude, but my very important point that I would like to say relating to freedom of speech, where I worked, but not only where I worked across the UK, but where I worked, I know from experience and from investigating this, and actually wrote a report about 3 other universities. There were Palestinian professors, and this is something that people usually have to bear in mind and don't. There were Palestinian professors that were engaged with universities that are working and supporting terrorism and also have terrorists. And so, for example, there was a memorandum of understanding where I worked with Birzeit University and the University of Applied Sciences in Gaza, where Israel actually demolished these universities, killed the professor that led the university in Gaza. He became a shaheed, and he worked with few universities, including Nottingham in the UK. So the links with terrorist organizations are very much evident within campuses in the UK. So we have to remember, it's not only threats on our freedom of speech, not allowing us to speak, but it's even more so allowing them to speak and to glorify terrorism. And I think that in terms of just a few words about solutions, because we can't conclude without solutions. And from my experience and research, the solution should be first cut funding to universities that are not addressing the problems of radicalization. We can't solve terrorism, we can't eliminate Hamas like this, but we can address the government, and that's what we do. And to say, look at the government, at what the management is doing, and try to mitigate the risk by not allowing managements to put in terrorists in campuses, both professors and staff. And there is much more in terms of this.
You can go on.
That was already radical statements in the
Thank you.
further discussion. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing in the intersection of the digital era. I think it was a very important addition to the discussion. And the last speaker is Moran Svorai. Moran is a researcher. Moran is a researcher at the Max Planck Institute for the study of democracy, security, and human rights at Hebrew U. She's also a practicing lawyer. She appeared many times before the Supreme Court, and she specializes also in labor law. And she has a specific, unique expertise at timing her lectures to conclude exactly at 1 p.m. when lunch starts.
Thank you.
And she will be talking about freedom of academic freedom as an ethical
I would
argument.
like to persuade you first that there is a difference between academic freedom and the freedom of expression, and that academic freedom is related to obligation, or that academic freedom is actually an ethical obligation. I write my PhD now, it's a second PhD with Professor Barak Medina, and I'm a student in the Hebrew University. My thesis is today is divided into 3 main parts. First, I would like to define the academic freedom as a professional obligation. Second, I would like to talk about the implications of this definition regarding specifically to academic freedom. And then I would like to talk very briefly of 3 case studies. So let's start. What is academic freedom? what I want to show is that there are some important similarities between the judiciary, journalism, and academia. It seems quite bizarre in the beginning because there are differences between these professions, but I think there are four main similarities. First, the pursuit of truth as an aim in itself. This is different from other professions. Second, the idea that they are related to common good, which is related to democracy. Third, that there is a relationship between institutional and individual academic freedom. And then I would arrive to my main point that academic freedom is basically an ethical obligation. Now, I think it's quite clear that all three professions are related to the pursuit of truth. What is important is the origin of academia in Plato's academy. And even though we are not in Plato's academy and there are different disciplines and different professions in the academy, I think the idea of the pursuit of truth did remain a very intrinsic part of academia, and I think that the idea of epistemic standards that every academia faculty must adhere to is very important until now. The second point seems bizarre also because we are used to think about the judiciary and journalism as part of democracy. Actually, they are two of the four branches of democracy. It seems more strange about academia, but I would like to just read the first citation here. There are more scholarship in this regard. The first citation is from the European Court of Human Rights, 2014. It says, "There is no Chinese wall between science and a democratic society. On the contrary, there can be no democratic society without free science and free scholars." So my idea is that there is also a relationship between democracy and the academia. And the third part of this part of the argument says that in all three professions there is a complex relationship between institutional and individual freedom. So in all three professions, there must be institutional freedom in order to safeguard the individual one, but there are limits to institutional authority that are required to protect individual freedom. And then I arrive to my main thesis, which says that in all three professions, freedom is also an obligation, actually a professional or ethical obligation. If we think about Hoffel's table, it seems, again, quite weird because we are used to think about rights and obligations as different parts of the table. But in these three professions, you cannot really do your job, you cannot really do a judge if you are not acting freely, and you cannot really do a good journalism if you are not free. I think the same applies also to academia. First, by analogy to the first two professions, I said in the beginning they are similar in some respects, and I think that because they are similar in the first three respects, they are also similar in this respect. Also, the second point here is that the role entails corresponding obligations. So, for example, if we think about a parent, if your role is to be a parent, you also have some obligations that are related to your role. What I say is that you cannot do really good academia work if you are not also free from external forces. Now, if we take this idea of freedom, which is also an obligation, I would like to say a few words about this idea with regard specifically to academic freedom. The first one is that academic freedom differs from faculty members' freedom of speech. Some of the lecturers before me did do some work that is in between. I think it is not accurate, because I think that there are some similarities or even some examples that are in this part of the diagram. It's a Venn diagram, but I think there are also examples that we can think of that are in different sides, and that academic freedom and the freedom of speech are not the same. For example, if we think about a law professor that discusses in class examples of incitement to violence, he can speak of ideas that if he speaks about them in the street, it will be forbidden. But within class, it is part of his or her academic freedom. And in the other part of this diagram, if we think of nonsense or lies, they are not forbidden as part of the freedom of expression, but they are not part of academic freedom. As academia, we must speak truth, or we must pursue truth. And the second implication is that there is that the justification for academic freedom is related to professional expertise. So if I am a math professor, I have more freedom in those areas that are related to my academic professionality. The third one is perhaps the most important, and it says that although institutions, academic institutions, have other legitimate rights or interests to maintain, like emotions of other faculty members or emotions of students, and there were other lectures before that talked about this important issue, I think that academic freedom takes precedence unless there is a near certainty of harm to the public in the specific circumstances. So I take the near certainty test, which we know in Israel since Kol Ha'am, and I say that within academia and with regard to academic freedom is more important. It takes precedence over other interests and rights unless there is a near certainty of harm. But then, when a faculty member breaches his or her obligation to pursue truth, I think his or her right or privilege is withdrawn. So this is the balance I suggest. And with these ideas, I would like to talk. How much time do I have?
About 7 minutes.
Good. I would like to talk about some examples about the implementation or application of my ideas. First, I would like to say that because academic freedom is an obligation, actually, or is also an obligation, ethical codes in the university should include this principle as part of them. I looked at the ethical codes in Israeli universities, and it was surprising that they are not the same in this regard. Surprisingly, Tel Aviv University and the Hebrew University do not include academic freedom as part of their ethical codes. Other universities like Ben-Gurion University, Haifa, and Bar Ilan do include this principle in the ethical codes, and I think it's right to include it. And then I arrived to 3 recent examples. I must say now that it was hard for me to be detached from these examples because they are very recent, but I thought it will be important to talk about them. about these three people. Do you know them? Do you recognize them? Some of them. This is Dr. Saada. She was dismissed from K College in October 2023. This is Dr. Ben Daniel. He was not dismissed from Ben Gurion University recently, and he is expressing himself outside the university with a different name. He calls himself John Brown. And this is Professor Shihum Kibukian. She was not dismissed, but she did left the Hebrew University in summer of 2024. Their cases are not the same. There are differences, but I think we can ask of any one of them whether it is related to academic freedom or to freedom of speech. And I think all of them are related to both types of rights. Dr. Saada's case was dealt in October 2023. I think K College did wrong with her. They dismissed her. I think, it's not that I think, I'm sure they didn't take into account at all the fact that she expressed herself with relation to her professional expertise, and I think it was wrong. Her case is still pending in court. Ben Daniel's case seems less related to academic freedom. He doesn't.
This college?
K College.
It's a teacher's.
מכללת K. Ben Daniel's case seems less related to academic freedom. He doesn't talk or express himself about politics at all in the university. He writes in a different name, John Brown, and he doesn't write about his expertise. He's a math professor and he deals with computer science. I think that Professor Shihum Kibukian is the most complex case because the main issue that led to many controversies in the Hebrew University was related to an interview she gave outside the university. But throughout this interview, she and her interviewers did mention much more than once that she is a professor, that her ideas are related to her scholarship. And she also referred to academic freedom as part of her protection. I don't think it's a good idea that I will say my views about these professors. It's not really important, but what I want to show in this last slide is that my idea that academic freedom is actually also an obligation. It can help us to analyze Shihum Kibukian case more specifically, more clearly. So the fact is that that some of her colleagues did think that she breached her obligation as an academic faculty because she was not rigorous in her methodological way. She was not rigorous in her standards. And then there are some questions I would like to ask. Did she breach her academic obligation to pursue truth really? And if so, was she influenced by external non-academic interests? And if so, there are more questions because this is a person that did receive her professorship much before, and there is a question: how can we, if we want, how can we deal with a claim, a critical claim that says that she breached her obligation? What measures, if any, do we have? And what I suggest in the end is that I think in such complicated cases, it can be a good idea to use international academic cooperation and not try to solve this problem or similar problems by internal committees, because I think there is a problem with taking a step back and looking at ourselves in these complex times. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so the moderator failed, and technology also failed us on the way. So we actually reached the end of our time. What I can tell you is that you probably noticed how we started from theory, went through some practical examples, and ended up with theory. And I think, at least from my own perspective, what we saw is that there is an ongoing effort, which I'm not sure we're succeeding at, but we're trying to find this kind of Rawlsian definition of what is academic freedom, and then applying it to various cases that are very challenging in these days. So what I urge you is to engage with the speakers at a lunch break and then breaks afterwards, and ask them whatever questions you may have and argue with them, because we just ran out of time. Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking.